Courageous conversations? What makes these conversations courageous?
Well, I think there's a great deal of in-depth material, and many of these leaders expressed views which I think they would not normally have done. Each of these interviews lasted an hour. That's a pretty long time for an intensive discussion. And they did, in many cases, reveal aspects of their private lives and their attitudes to the community, the society, and the businesses in which they operate, which probably we haven't heard before.
Now, you've probed the minds of about 14 of South Africa's luminaries and leaders. What is it that they have to say about the state that this country's in?
Well, that wasn't a question that really came up. I mean, there's an assumption, I think, certainly on my part, and I think probably also on theirs, that they enjoy being here, that they are South Africans, that they're committed to the country. That came through very strongly, that they want to do the very best they can for the country.
Now, obviously, in terms of just the technical elements, there's this is a multimedia initiative. There's a print version, a CD. Then there's also a dialogue series, is my understanding, through your collaboration with the University of Pretoria Centre for Responsible Leadership. How does that all add in enriching the conversation and taking some of the themes further?
Well, I mean, I think that the way in which the book was planned is pretty unusual.
Right.
I was approached by the Centre for Responsible Leadership at the Faculty for Economics and Business Management, University of Pretoria, to put this thing together. So what we did was we invited and we interviewed 15 business leaders. Right. One of them withdrew late. And each business leader has been given a chapter. There's a biography, which I've written to begin with. Then there is the 1 hour long interview, which is transcribed and which appears in the book. And we don't really speak the way we write, so we've had to do a little bit of massaging in order to make it readable. And then there is an assessment by me of what I thought I got out of the interview. And finally, written absolutely blind, an assessment by Professor Stella Nkomo of what she got out of the interview. We did not compare notes. So these two assessments appear in the book, and we did not discuss what we found. So I think that makes it pretty unusual.
You said that the question of where they see South Africa didn't really come up, but it's an underlying theme or a sense that you get, because they obviously operate in South Africa, and they operate in South Africa at a time of transformation, at a time where the development agenda is very, very strong, at a time where we're dealing with issues of continued racial polarities, unemployment, gender equality. How do they grapple with some of these as very pressing challenges in the work that they do?
Racial issues never came up. Never discussed.
And what does that tell you?
On one occasion, perhaps, when Jabba Mabuza related a story from his immediate past.
What does that tell you?
Well, it made me feel very happy that we'd got over this, that it wasn't an issue. So far as, let me give you an example about how one of these people felt about South Africa, and he's a foreigner. He's an Australian, Mark Kutifani, who now runs Anglo Gold Ashanti. And his commitment to the country and to the company was absolutely extraordinary. And this shone through the interview. Really very interesting.
Okay, let's talk about some of the stories that these 14 leaders tell. Let's focus on Bobby Gotzel, because I think he's a doyen of business. He is a former mining boss. He was embroiled in that Eskom debacle, took an ethical stand. He is now involved in a constitutional movement to try to help us get back to the values of the Constitution. So I think his story spans all spectrum of South African business and social life. What does he have to say?
Well, he's very blunt, and he thinks really right out of the box. I mean, you know about Edward de Bono with his lateral thinking. I think if Bobby Gotzel decided to take on Edward de Bono, he would find him a serious competitor when it comes to lateral thinking. As an example, Gotzel said, our parastatals are not really being managed particularly well. Do we really need boards of directors? Should we put something else in place? He didn't tell me what he would put in place, but it certainly came up. That was the sort of conversation I had with Bobby. The issue of what happened at Eskom we did not traverse because it had been beaten to death before we got there. Yes.
Yeah. And the whole constitutional issue, civil society needing to reclaim its voice?
No, that did not come up either. You know, he's a member of this National Planning Commission, and it would have been folly for him to have trodden down pathways that haven't really been properly explored, so we didn't go there either.
You also mentioned Jabba Mabuza along with Adrian Gore, who are both featured in your book. Some people see them as the entrepreneurs that many people should emulate, you know, having a great idea, being a forward thinker, starting something from scratch into a great international corporate. They also come from two different worlds. How did their stories sort of, you know, collide, for lack of a better word?
They didn't collide. They meshed, quite interestingly. I mean, I find Jabba Mabuza a most fascinating fellow. I do not know of any other circumstance in which a man who drove a taxi in South Africa ends up becoming the chief executive of the biggest entertainment and gaming business in the country. And he's a man who does not have a tertiary education, and I think he's sad that he didn't get that. What also came through quite clearly from Jabu was an ability to encourage the people around him to do the best they can. I mean, in that sense, he's a true leader. He's a motivator. Not a mentor, but he really is a motivator. Adrian Gore, unbelievably clever. I mean, really brilliant. And a man who came up with an idea, put a small team together and simply ran with it, and very anxious and conscious about leadership issues.
And then the two women you feature, I think it's a reflection of the fact that South Africa, despite all our attempts at affirmative action and the like, we haven't really dealt with issues of patriarchy. That's why two prominent women in business. I think it's an indictment. But did they say a lot about...
Yes, they said a lot.
About the gender issues and
not so much gender. I mean, for example, I think that Nonkululeko Nyembezi Haita, she's unbelievably intelligent, very clever. She goes to a university in the UK. She gets a degree in electrical engineering. Not that she's interested in electrical engineering, but she liked the relationship between engineering and mathematics, which is her first love. She then goes to Caltech, an institute that has produced more than 30 Nobel Prize winners, and gets her master's degree, then goes into IBM. A woman who is clearly, there's no glass ceiling for her. It's not an issue. Maria Ramos, on the other hand, told a fascinating story about how in her first job as a teller in Barclays Bank in Vereeniging, she ran straight into the glass ceiling because she discovered that there was a course in the company which enabled her to go to, she thought to get to a university, but they said it only applied to men. So right from the very beginning of her working life, she was involved in a fight, which I must say she won. So very interesting.